Creatine is definitely another supplement I often recommend for cyclists. It's a compound naturally found in food, predominantly meat and fish, but it's something that I'll often use as part of like a recovery performance and also supporting sort of strength as well.
It's predominantly found in fish and meat. So what about vegetarians?
Much more difficult for a vegetarian to get creatine naturally from food. So that's where it even becomes more important for a plant-based or vegetarian cyclist to be, making sure that they're supplementing potentially with creatine as well.
So what are the primary benefits of taking creatine?
So it has a number of different benefits. Often people think creatine is only for sort of bulking and getting bigger, and that's something that is definitely a myth. It can be absolutely a part of that, but by taking creatine doesn't automatically mean that you're going to gain all this muscle mass and get huge and jacked, unfortunately. Otherwise it would be pretty easy for us all to be taking it and just that occurring. Where it helps is definitely muscle recovery, and so it can be really useful for any sort of endurance program, but where most of the research lies is supporting sort of speed and power-based movements as well.
How does creatine enhance muscle performance and recovery?
So creatine supports energy for short and sharp bursts of movement, right? And we have creatine naturally in the muscle cells, but only for a really short amount or short capacity, or limited capacity. So by taking creatine, we're improving or enhancing how long that energy capacity is there for, but still specific to short, sharp bursts. So think any power movement, particularly if that's in the gym, it could be on the bike, so hills and things like that. But because of that, it can also support aerobic capacity and the recovery of the muscles just by providing more energy capacity to those muscles.
Something I noticed when I was taking creatine, and a lot of other people have said this as well, they've like almost immediately gained weight. Is it because you hold more water or you're just hungrier? Yeah,
and this is where people, again, think that creatine is going to make them big or gain weight. Generally, when you start taking creatine, there's some water that's being held in the body as part of sort of water being held in the muscle cells as well. This is very normal. This is part of the process, and generally that water retention will, sort of fade within the sort of 4 weeks of taking creatine. So you're going to probably see, if you're jumping on the scales, you're probably going to see a slight increase in the scales for the first couple of weeks of the creatine supplementation, and this water retention will go away anywhere like around about the 4 to 6 week mark.
Is this something you should be taking daily or in the lead up to other events? Do you periodize it?
No, you can do, but generally creatine is something that I'll take. It can be an all-rounder. You can have washout periods and whatnot, but it's generally going to support all parts of a training phase and racing as well. So there's a couple of different ways to start taking it. We can either just take it, daily and a once-off dose, or we can do a bit of a loading phase for the first week. And the benefit of that loading phase is that we just saturate the muscles much quicker. We're going to get performance benefits faster. So by the end of that 1 week, we go back down to a single dose. So generally in that first week, if we're doing a loading phase, we're taking anywhere from a 3 to 5 gram dose of creatine monohydrate 4 times over the day. That's for the first 5 days only, and then after the first 5 days, we're dropping that back down to either a 3 or 5 gram dose. And that 3 or 5 gram dose is dependent on your sort of size and muscle size as well. So a small female, for example, I might only have at 3 grams. A larger, more muscular male, I might have a 5 gram dose. You can just go straight into that 3 or 5 gram dose once per day, but it'll generally take about sort of 1 month roughly to sort of fully saturate the muscles, depending on how much meat and fish you're eating as well. And keep in mind with that loading phase, that's where you see more of that water retention. So if you're trying to avoid that water retention as well, then you're generally better off going just into sort of once daily, but keeping in mind that it's going to take that 4 weeks to sort of get the benefits from it.
So are there any potential side effects from taking this?
Look, no, not that we know of, but I always suggest that people sort of still get blood tests and things like that done with their doctors just to make sure sort of kidney and liver function are okay. It's still another supplement that we're adding to the body, and we want to make sure that the kidney's breaking it down properly. keep in mind that you shouldn't be doing that loading phase of the, maximum of 20 grams for the first 5 days for any longer than that 5 days. We don't want to be taking large amounts for extended periods of time, because it is going to be too much for the body to break down. And keep in mind, if you're taking any other supplements, particularly things like pre-workouts, they often add creatine, and same with some protein powders, they add creatine as well. So always check everything you're taking, that you make sure you're not doubling up.
Is there a way to monitor the response from creatine use?
Look, it's one of those things, again, it's hard to just put down to creatine, because it's still the icing on top of the cake. We're still looking at food as your major source of supporting performance, supporting sort of muscle strength and recovery. If you weren't changing anything else and you were just adding creatine, we could potentially look at, your recovery time. Again, that's quite subjective. If you were looking at gaining lean muscle and that was part of your goal, you would have to then, have a nutrition plan to support that as well. But getting a DEXA scan might be a really good way at looking at that if gaining muscle was one of the things that you were looking at. And you could see, before and after lean muscle or lean mass, on a DEXA scan. And the other thing would be just, some tests in the gym particularly, or, with your coach on the bike, is setting the same test at the very beginning, and then say after the 12-week mark, and just seeing if there's any sort of performance differences. That's generally how we sort of do it in a lot of the programs that I work with, is sort of doing some test set to see if we're improving things along the way. Keep in mind there's many other things that are going to impact at that, and that's obviously food, hydration, sleep quality, general stress on the body, those sorts of things as well.
So yeah, creatine certainly helps build muscle or maintain muscle mass, but if you're not doing all the other basic stuff right, then it won't do anything.
Exactly. It's supplements are very much, as they state, a supplement to your base diet. So if you're looking at gaining muscle and gaining strength and performance, but you're not eating properly, then creatine isn't going to be the be all end all and the the band-aid on top of that. It's getting a really good nutrition plan in place to support performance or support strength or gaining muscle, and then we're adding creatine, again, a bit of the icing on top of the cake to support all of those goals.
You also mentioned that creatine is great for recovery. So as a cyclist, how should they be using it, and when should they be using it?
So for cycling, I think creatine's important. Generally we recommend creatine for short, sharp bursts and events. So if you think of a typical cycling event, it's generally going to be an endurance race, but creatine can absolutely support that, particularly in a training program when we're looking at interval training or your hill sessions and things like that, which are a little bit more short, sharp, high intensity efforts, repetitive efforts that creatine supplementation can be really good for as well. But it's also, I would add creatine monohydrate as a supplement. For example, if someone was injured and they were trying to maintain as much strength and lean muscle over a period where they couldn't use those muscles as much, or just generally as a part of a recovery program, when we're just looking at someone who's got a really extensive training program, there's going to be some aerobic sessions and some higher intensity, but you want to be taking it sort of on a daily basis to support all of those sessions.
So we know supplementing creatine is beneficial for increasing your power output for short, sharp bursts. We also mentioned it's a great tool to use for recovery, but why is that?
Look, it's an addition to recovery nutrition, but it's how it works for recovery is by increasing creatine muscle stores. We're mitigating sort of muscle loss as well, and that's why it's really important if you're vegetarian or if you're during periods of injury and you're not able to use those muscles, that creatine can be really useful in that regard, because we're reducing the risk of reduction in muscle and muscle fibers. Yeah, so timing of creatine, there's lots of sort of misinformation out there on timing. A lot of people say pre-training, a lot of people say post-training. It doesn't matter when you take creatine as long as it's consistent each day. The most important thing is that you should be taking it with carbohydrates though, because this will actually improve the absorption of the creatine into the muscles as well. So timing wise, it doesn't matter if you have it pre or post, as long as you can have it with some form of carbohydrates to enhance the absorption. A lot of people like taking it post, particularly if they're already taking a protein powder or a smoothie or something like that. But again, just making sure that it's not just protein and creatine, we've got some sort of carbohydrate in there. minimum 20 gram dose, but anything over that, depending on how much carbohydrate we're looking at as part of your particular meal plan.
Creatines are good for cyclists and not just the gym junkies.
Not just the gym junkies. It's definitely well renowned and lots of research to support cycling in particular. So it's not just a supplement that's going to make you huge. There's many benefits to performance output, and particularly those short, sharp bursts of high intensity efforts.